This meeting of the Kirkland Planning Commission is called to order. Let's start with a roll call.
Bria Heiser.
Here.
Aaron Jacobson.
Here.
Gina Medea.
Here.
Scott Reiser.
Here.
Justin Robbins. Angela Rosman.
Here.
Rodney Rutherford.
Here. With the majority of commissioners present, we have a quorum and can do business. Next item on the agenda is comments from the audience. Do we have anyone signed in, or if there is anyone online who would like to speak, please raise your hand. Click the raise hand button.
Our screens
We think our screens here aren't working as well, so I don't know if that's something that staff is working on already or not. Awesome. All right, Liz Hunt, if you're ready to come on up. Oh, actually, I have to do my spiel first. So, one moment. Yes. All right, so the next item on our agenda is items from the audience. This is the portion of the meeting when we hear from the public about items that are not scheduled for public hearing, of which there are none tonight. In order to hear from as many people as possible tonight, we are allowing any individual wishing to provide comments to speak for a maximum of 3 minutes. The timer on the lectern will flash a yellow light when 30 seconds remain and a red light when your time is ended. To be fair to all speakers, we will strictly adhere to the 3-minute limit. The Commission wants to hear from as many different views and opinions as possible. If you have already heard another speaker state your comment, please consider not repeating the comment and instead provide a comment or perspective that is unique to you. In making your comments, we ask that you please direct them to the Commission. This is not a time for give and take with the Commission. Obscene, profane, threatening, harassing, or abusive language towards the Commission, city staff, or those in the audience is not allowed. As audience members, please refrain from any demonstrative agreement or disagreement with a speaker, such as clapping, cheering, or booing. These actions are not only disruptive, they may also intimidate or have the effect of excluding others in the community whose views may differ. We'll begin with items from the audience with the list of people here in person that have signed up to speak. When I call your name, please approach the dais to address us. Online audience members may indicate that you wish to speak by raising your hand. Click the raise hand button in the Zoom meeting now. When it is your turn to speak, we will admit you into the virtual room as a panelist. Please remain muted until I call your name, and then you may unmute to address the Commission. So with that, Liz Hunt, please go ahead and come forward.
Good evening, Commissioners and staff. Liz Hunt, Kirkland resident. I have a few comments about the middle housing zoning updates that you all are working on. I sent you email, but it was only a few hours ago, so I will highlight a few items here. First of all, I wanted to thank you all for reducing the required housing types from 9 to 6 in low density residential areas. That makes sense. Also, thank you for noting that development standards like floor area ratio and lot coverage play a crucial role in what can feasibly be built on a lot. Third item, residential lot sizes are shrinking in our city. It's happening quite a bit with the existing zoning, and it's bound to get even more prevalent with some of the new rules coming down. So my question is, how will our infrastructure keep up with that? For example, we have small lots appearing. There's one very close to my home, which is a condoized ADU, which is on a detached ADU, which is on a 2,330 square foot lot in a 7,200 zone. And that happened because of condoizing off the DADU. So we're seeing smaller lots appearing, and we're building more housing, which is awesome, but we hand in hand with that need to manage infrastructure and so forth to keep up with this increase in density. So I look forward to hearing more about how we're going to manage those impacts. All low-density residential lots in Kirkland can now have 3 housing units, a house, an ADU, and a detached ADU. Current zoning, that's going to go up to allowing 4 units and sometimes 6 units on lots. So also, again, questions on how we're going to handle that density. We're already the #3 most dense city in the state of Washington, according to the Washington State Office of Financial Management. So how are we going to handle being even more dense? And we don't even have light rail. Also, state law HB 1110 allows a municipality to only focus these new increases of density on 75% of the property, residential property in the city. And I'm wondering why Kirkland has not taken up that alternative, which is spelled out in that bill. The inclusionary zoning option, number 2, which is encouraged in that staff memo, have some questions on how that works and what that means. You can see the email. And a couple other questions in my email as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. Let's see, do we have anyone online raising their hand yet? I can't quite see it. No one? Okay. Then John Kapler, would you like to come up and speak?
Thank you all. My name's John Kapler. I'm a Kirkland resident, also a practicing architect. I'm here to talk about the middle housing tonight. You all have received lots of letters, plus and minus, that sort of thing. I'm here tonight to focus on the code implementation language and how it's written and how difficult it is for us practicing professionals to navigate our way through it. It is very, very complicated. I'd like to first start off by, I believe that the definitions in the code should all mean the same thing for all typologies of houses, and they don't. The code that's currently written does not fix that. A couple of examples in Chapter 113, 113.25, there's a chart that talks about typology of houses, and that uses language like square footage. There's no definition for square footage. It's gross floor area. Gross floor area has a very specific definition of what it is. The chart then goes on to define in a specific type of housing, specifically cottage, you calculate square footage this way, but you're also allowed to do 2 and 3 unit homes. It's calculated differently. That should not be the case. We should have gross square footage, and square footage is calculated. It doesn't matter the typology. We also get deductions for single-family housing, but in Chapter 113, a cottage, according to the city, is not a single-family house. So it has definitions according to the deductions that we get in floor area ratio. However, in 113, 2 and 3 unit homes are also in that chapter, and they do get the deductions. One of the biggest issues that I think is a problem is the floor area I'm trying to go as fast as I can. The floor area allowances gives you a certain square footage on an overall lot, but if you have a cottage unit, the floor area of the cottage unit includes all of the floor area, including the garage and everything beyond the 64 square foot deduction of the front porch. So if somebody wants to have a deck or even a covered deck, and even if you're allowed to have the covered deck in the FAR, you can't in a cottage home. It doesn't make any sense if we're looking at bulk and mass of a unit. The last thing is, based on the typology of house, when we study how to put different types of homes on a house, oftentimes we cannot get 3 units or 3 cottages where we would be allowed on a particular house because the calculations don't work out the same as if we did a single-family house with an attached ADU and a detached ADU. And the bulk and mass looks very, very different, and the marketplace kind of has an allergic reaction to attached housing. People really want single-family housing in single-family zones. Affordability. There's a rule of 5 in affordability, super condensed. You can basically afford, if you don't have any debt and you put the 20% down, you can afford 5 times your income. So I'm glad we're not implementing that because for a $50,000 additional fee in a house, you have to make $10,000 extra in your fee. All of you go to your work tomorrow morning and ask for a $10,000 raise so you can pay additional money to pay for affordable housing. So
Thank you, John.
thank you.
Please share, send us an email. It sounds like you have a lot of details that I think staff and commission would like to unpack. So
I'm not bashful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
All right. Do we have anyone raising their hand in the online audience? I don't see any, but okay. All right. With that, that's the end of comments from the audience. We'll have another segment at the end of the meeting. Next item on the agenda is special presentations, of which there are none. And so we were on to the next item, which is our study session on a briefing on middle housing code state compliance. Steph, go ahead and take it from here.
Great. Good evening, Chair Rutherford and Vice Chair Heiser and Commissioners. I just have really brief introductory remarks just to set the stage for Scott Guter's presentation. So you'll be presented with a lot of options tonight, as was summarized in your staff report, for a bunch of different topics. One of the things that Scott will be presenting tonight, as you know from taking a look at your memo, is some guidance that we got from the City Council that was received after the last big briefing that you all had on middle housing on February 27th, where you generated a lot of good ideas and some good guidance. So we, at council's request, we went back to council on March 4th and March 18th so that they could provide some guidance to the Planning Commission on some of these issues that you were debating on the 27th. The City Council wanted some additional time to consider the options, so that's why we went twice to them. And, the topics that they considered are really the main ones that are in your memo tonight. The first one is, should ADUs count towards the allowed density? The second topic was really which of the 6 out of 9 housing typologies should be allowed in the city, and where should those be allowed? And then the last topic, of course, is should we implement any sort of inclusionary zoning as part of phase 1 of this work? And then if so, what should that look like? And they provided some really good guidance that Scott will talk about, general support for option 2 that was really compiled based on the individual pieces of feedback that the Planning Commission gave us on the 27th, right? On the 27th, it's not like the Planning Commission voted on a specific affordable housing option. So what we presented to the City Council on those 2 occasions was sort of woven together from all of the input that individual members of the Planning Commission provided, and we'll look forward to feedback on that tonight. And with that, I'll hand it over to Scott.
All right, with that, let's go. Let's see if I can. Does it make? Can I move? Oh, look at that. I can do it that way. All right, here we are. The agenda. So,
One thing first, I'm guessing someone in staff is still working on getting our monitors.
Yeah,
Okay, they're working on it. Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
okay. So, as Adam kind of expressed, we've kind of done a lot of work here since we've last met. There's been several touch points, not only with City Council, we've gone back to Transportation Commission, we've done several public meetings as well. There's been a lot of work that we've been doing, basically trying to respond to the feedback that we heard from this Planning Commission. So I'll go over a little bit of the feedback that we saw, that we heard from the public and council. I'll summarize what we heard from you last time on the 27th. And then we'll move into a couple of those specific topics that council provided some specific direction on, in particular when it comes to those 3 topics: density, housing types, and affordable housing. We'll go over those items in your remaining packet related to some additional code amendments that we've made since we've last talked, and some forthcoming code amendments. We'll go specifically into parking requirements after that, since this was a topic that this commission wanted more information on, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Oh, good. All right. So here's what we heard from the city. A lot of the city is generally supportive of our 2-phased approach. As you recall, we are basically trying to just get across the finish line with minimum compliance. We are not talking about, other optimizations, some large changes to the zoning code at this point in time. We just need to get to the June deadline and move on with a more intensive analysis, more thoughtful analysis with feedback from the public. We've heard a lot of good direction so far. Some of it was provided tonight, and we'll be exploring that in phase 2. We've also heard some support also about how we've managed how we're including housing types in the in the code. We've identified them as it's strategically allowing us to basically point the state to our code and say, yes, we are including all, the necessary housing types that are required under the law. They support that, but as we've heard from the public, that was not, they weren't supportive of us applying all of those housing types in every location in the city. So that was one of the comments that we heard repeatedly. And then there was concern about our affordable housing options. In particular, there was a lot of concern about that we might be going a little bit too far with our options, that there's concern that it might hinder development of middle housing. There was concern that any kind of inclusion, some of these inclusionary requirements might even penalize existing homeowners. Concern there. And so with that, we've developed some additional code. Here, kind of jumping forward to a meeting that we just had with with City Council. They gave us some specific feedback on these items. You'll see here on the screen. I don't know if we can move my head out of the way. You can't even read this. Can you do that? There. Thank you. I'll just move to the bottom of your screen. There you go. Anyway, so council was supportive of continuing to exempt ADUs. However, they wanted to keep our current requirements of just only allowing 2 ADUs maximum per property. They supported staff's revisions to the allowed housing typologies based on different zones, specifically the differences between low density and multifamily zones. They also wanted us to continue to pursue affordable housing, at least drafting affordable housing, starting at the first unit, but really wanted to include exemptions and a delayed effective date with those inclusionary requirements. So going in the Wayback Machine, back to last month when we talked to you, which kind of drove a lot of the updates that we drafted for you here, which was that at our last meeting, we heard from the Planning Commission that you wanted us to explore accessory dwelling units with density, that you wanted us to be a little more to scrutinize where we're putting the different housing types in our city. And then specifically, again, as Adam kind of mentioned, there's a bunch of conversation about affordable housing. So what we heard, collectively, that we do want to kind of explore what we called options 3 and 4 in that last packet. That if we do that, though, that there has to be a lot of incentives built around that option. That there has to be clear inclusionary requirements. Again, exempting smaller units, additions, and then there was overarching consensus that there was that any new inclusionary requirement that we would put into place, that it wouldn't constrain any new production. And lastly, we should also consider vesting options or a delayed affordable housing code amendment option. Okay, so getting into density, here's how we responded to density. Here so this is kind of the thing that we would have brought to you before council, but council got here first. So so we drafted up a couple options for you to consider. We've already received guidance from City Council, of course, but I do want to present those 2 options for you. Our existing code does double the density. It you are allowed to have accessory dwelling units, but you're only limited to 2 per property. The last draft code that we gave you, we said, well, follow the state requirements, keep our double density for those larger lots that may be able to go beyond 6 units, that are currently going beyond six units, so we don't penalize larger properties. But we said we'll we can do ADUs with every unit, right? You guys didn't like that, by the way. So we heard that you didn't like that. So we came back with this option where we would analyze, like, including ADUs in unit density. And then there's the option of, like, just, keep excluding it, but just limiting it to 2 ADUs maximum per property. Spoiler alert, what happens when you do include ADUs in the unit density, you only get to 6 maximum. That's where you get. But planning commission, city council was very supportive of just allowing ADUs to continue to be exempted, but the keeping that limit to 2. So not changing too much, just being additive with the state densities. This is a kind of example of what that kind of looks like. So so I did these, like, this is my isometric drawings, these little butter cubes. We start up in this corner over here, where this is your single family total allowance, which would be your height, your lot coverage, and your floor area ratio, your maximums there. And then under our current code, you can take that same volume, you can split it into 2, and then have 2 ADUs on that. Under the state code, you have 4 by right everywhere in the city, and then in certain circumstances, you can get up to 6, which would take that same volume and break it down into 6. The X'd out option was the option that we had presented to you before, which got you up to pretty much 12, sorry. But as the table kind of shows on the side there, those units get really small really quick, because we're not doing anything in this phase of code amendments that addresses the butter cube itself. We're not replacing the butter cube, we're keeping the butter cube as is. So this starts to break down, at least in terms of feasibility, really quickly. So we were pretty confident that even if you did allow for all the housing types, that they would quickly break down and you wouldn't get all the housing types based on what would just basically be allowed under our general massing constraints, maximum floor area ratio, maximum FAR. So, but with that, we've adjusted it still, and we only are allowing a few housing types in low-density residential zones. Yes, go ahead.
Can I just ask a question since we're on that slide?
Yeah. Go back.
What about detached ADUs, and why isn't that part of the figures on this?
Well, because they're still constrained by the same massing standards, right? You only get the 50% lot coverage. It doesn't matter if you have an ADU on there, a detached ADUs, attached ADUs, it doesn't matter. You can still constrain to those massing standards, overall massing standards.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Scott.
Okay, so getting into the proposed housing types. So taking your direction, saying, no, we don't want to put all these different housing types in every zone, in every place in our city. We just split these up into the two different categories: our existing multifamily and then our low density zones. Since the allowed by right state minimum is 4, we capped the triplex, the duplex, triplex, and up to fourplex. Then we got rid of the multiplexes 5 and 6. We kept cottage housing because that is a very successful housing typology. Townhomes, because they are predominantly what also is being built in most of our our multifamily zones, and keeping stack flats as an option in there. in terms of like courtyard apartments, we decided that because there's some open space requirements or around courtyard apartments, we think that, we already have a successful code, in our cottage, clustered housing typologies, our cottages, and as we've heard here, even tonight, that, our detached cluster is actually would be more popular. We also think that a courtyard apartment and the required open space around the units would not be beneficial in multifamily zones. It would be kind of restrictive, and we don't think it would just be picked up successfully in those areas. So here's the multifamily zone. We just add the 5-plex and 6-plex in here, if you can get there, and again, not keeping the courtyard apartments in the city. We could always revisit courtyard apartments if we want to in phase 2 when we're adjusting massing standards and such. But we feel like also that, you can probably get to a courtyard apartment style even with, duplexes and triplexes being able to be incorporated into a project. If you can get up to, 2 duplexes or a triplex in a cottage, or, some variation thereof. All right, now moving on to affordable housing. This is a slide I might have given you before, but this is basically what the state's option for inclusionary requirements. This is the reason why we're talking about this in the first place, because under the state code, there would be an inclusionary requirement for all properties outside of a quarter mile of a major transit stop, which is basically that right now is that stop around the Stride station that's being built. And that leaves most of the city up to the being subject to this inclusionary requirement. It only talks about the 5th and 6th unit being inclusionary at these affordable levels at 60% area median income for renter occupied and 80% area median income at owner occupied. That's a 33% inclusionary requirement if you want to get to 6. The obvious outcomes of that would be that no one would ever want to do that, so we would only get 4. And you can imagine we already have cottage housing at this point in time that is above that number. We have developments that are above that number. So what would happen on those larger lots is that we would just subject them to just not building to, their maximum potential, development potential. They would just end up, if there could be 6 cottages, they would still build 4. That's what they would do. So that's the outcome here. This city staff is definitely not recommending this as an option. So we crafted up a few options here. Again, keeping the state option up there, taking your feedback. And again, we came to you the first time with, some, general, parameters that we, basically our guiding principles of like how we drafted up the previous options. And we narrowed that down to option 2 here that's displayed, kind of taking your collective feedback. What that ends up looking like is the 1+ in option 2, that would be keeping it, looking at affordable housing starting at the first unit, but keeping our existing inclusionary affordability, which is actually at the 100% AMI for owner occupied. That's pretty much what most middle housing is going to be. It's not going to be renter occupied, it's going to be owner occupied, so we felt like that was a little more generous. And then we carved in a little bit of those exemptions you talked about before, exempting units that are up to about 2,000 square feet. We want a little bit of feedback on that because we kind of give you a range between 1,700 and 2,000 square feet. There's that this would exempt existing units, and then not penalizing any added square footage that you put on existing units. The third option is always defer this over. Now, this is something that we heard at the March 4th council meeting, is like, can't we just defer this to phase 2, right? Thinking about this at a future date when we actually start talking about, massings, changing the butter cube, okay? When we start changing the butter cube, maybe we can start talking about that here. The reason why we're still presenting this to you here is because we're adding capacity already with the added density. And when we get to phase 2, there'll be less, that's what we'll be bargaining for. This could actually be a placeholder. Option 2 could be a placeholder, especially if we have a delayed effective date that, puts us out closer to the phase 2 adoption date. Just forecasts this is what we're going to be looking at as a citywide inclusionary requirement. Those, of course, can be dialed. All this stuff can be dialed up or down in phase 2. And I'm going to pause here for a moment because I think Adam wanted to talk for a minute.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Scott. First of all, thanks for your patience on the monitors. Our IT staff and our admin staff are trying to fix whatever is going on. So thanks for bearing with us. The one thing I wanted to do is just take a minute and talk about some of the public comments that we've gotten over the last couple of days. They've been mostly from the master builders and I think folks affiliated with the master builders. We received really 2 letters from the master builders. One was from February 26, and then one was from March 26, so about a month later. And that they do say slightly different things. And so what I wanted to do is go over just in a little bit of detail the February 26th letter, which I think option 2 is very responsive to, actually. The February 26th letter from Master Builders makes 4 main points, and I'll just go through them one by one and talk about how the middle option responds to the concerns. The first point that they made was that the economic analysis done by Arch they do not agree with, and they don't think that it would result in feasible housing development. And just want to be really clear, option 2, actually none of the options really incorporate the Arch recommendation. The Arch recommendation was to impose a per square foot fee on middle housing, and none of the options that are being presented tonight do that. As a matter of fact, option 2 exempts all middle housing projects from any sort of fee whatsoever. So I think we were responsive on that point. The second point that the Master Builders letter made was that the proposed affordability requirements are not economically feasible for anyone building small-scale projects. And again, option 2 really exempts all small-scale projects, right? That would exempt projects, any projects less than 2,000 square feet or 1,700 square feet. So you could build as many 1,700 square foot or even 2,000 square foot cottages as you want and not pay any money towards in lieu fees. So that was the second point that that letter made. The third point was that Master Builders encouraged an alternative that would increase the square footage exemption to 1,500 square feet of living space. And again, option 2 goes even farther than that, right? The proposal is to exempt anything up to 1,700 square feet or 2,000 square feet. So I think the exemption goes even further than what Master Builders was recommending in that letter. And then the last point that they made in that letter was that they urged the Planning Commission to reconsider any expansion of affordable housing requirements in a way that ensures they do not disproportionately impact middle housing or ADU development. And again, based on the exemptions that Scott identified, ADUs and middle housing would really not be affected by option 2. So just wanted to be clear about how we responded based on Planning Commission feedback and City Council feedback to the issues that were raised in the Master Builders letter. The letters that we've gotten over the last couple of days, I think, take a different approach and make different comments from the letter that we received before. Basically, what the letters that we received over the last couple of days are saying is just defer to phase 2, which is a totally valid option. It's still an option that's on the table in front of you, but it's really different from, I think, the direction or the suggestions that Master Builders was making on February 26th. So just wanted to go over some of the public feedback that we got. I'll hand it over to Scott.
Yeah, so we can have it. We can wait and when we open this up for discussion, we can talk about it then. But if you have any kind of questions now, we can take those questions. Otherwise, I'll move on to the parking analysis.
Is there interest in, I see one hand interest in talking about this now, asking questions? Yeah, okay, go ahead, Commissioner Jacobson.
Just a question, when you said that we're not doing a per square foot fee, what is the affordable housing requirement going to look like?
Yeah, I can talk about that a little bit. So we already have an existing approach to figuring out in lieu fees. It's a program that's already in place in our medium density zones, high density residential zones, mixed use zones. And basically what the in lieu fee is if you have to provide a fractional unit, for instance, less than one unit, we calculate an in lieu fee in a lot of cases. And the in lieu fee is based on, really, it's the cost of construction of a generic affordable housing unit. It's not necessarily, that doesn't necessarily correspond to what's being built as a market rate unit. It's just a generic affordable housing unit that's built in the city. So the in lieu fee is basically the difference between the cost of construction of that generic affordable housing unit and how much a lower income household pays for that affordable housing unit. And so this is a very rough estimate because it changes a little bit based on the land values that are different across the city, but generally speaking, sort of for a generic affordable housing unit built in the city, the in lieu fee for one unit is $400,000, right? So that's not, that's the cost of that's how much, that is the in lieu fee for building one affordable housing unit. So basically, if you're building one market rate unit and you were imposed a 10% inclusionary requirement, your in lieu fee for that one unit would be $40,000. And so that equates to something like $16 a square foot for a house that is 2,500 square feet. If you're building a bigger house than 2,500 square feet, it would be less than $16 a square foot. So again, just to answer your question, Commissioner Jacobson, we don't impose it on a square footage basis. The in lieu fee is just based on the cost of construction of a generic affordable housing unit in the city. And sorry, just one last wrap-up note is that is just the current methodology that we have today. That doesn't say that this Planning Commission we couldn't revise the code based on Planning Commission guidance and City Council guidance to establish a different methodology for in lieu fees. But that's the methodology that's currently baked into the code today.
I have a follow-up question on that. When you say it's on a per unit basis, and then you're talking about this 2,500 square foot, is it being worked out to like being applied proportionally based on the extent to which that 2,500 square foot unit goes beyond the threshold, or is it because you've crossed that threshold, you pay the full 10%?
Yeah, this is what I just described as the way that we calculate in lieu fees today, right? So if you're building a 4-unit project, right, that is subject to in lieu fees, 10% of that 4-unit project is what you have to set aside as in lieu fees, right? So, you would basically calculate the in lieu fee for one affordable housing unit, right? And then you would take 40% of that, and that would be the in lieu fee that 4-unit project would pay. So what we're talking about here is a different approach, right? So under this approach, say if you are building one big house, say, right, one big single family house, you would pay 10% of the in lieu fee for one affordable housing unit, which again, just as a really rough estimate is, one affordable housing unit, the in lieu fee for that would be $400,000. So that one single family house would pay 10% of that, which would be $40,000. And I don't think, based on the current methodology, that the fee would be very much affected by how big the single family house is.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I know
Yeah, so it'd be the same fee no matter if they went over the threshold by 1 square foot or 2,000.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So under this current approach, if you're building a 2,001 square foot house, you would be subject to in lieu fees. And I know there's different approaches to that as well that we could talk about with you. For instance, exempting the first 2,000 square feet from the house, so you would pay the in lieu fee on the last foot or something
proportionally on the last foot.
Yeah. So there's different approaches to it, and again, this is a slightly different approach to how we currently do in lieu fees, right? Because we would subject even one unit. Option 2 would subject just one unit to the fees.
Okay. Commissioner Heiser.
I have a lot of questions about $400,000. I don't think you can build a affordable unit for $400,000. I think we're at 610 now or something like that. So, I mean, I guess my question would be, are we asking the builder to triple the building permit cost? Because right now it's $75,000 for a building permit in the city of Kirkland, which I'm sure everyone's surprised at, but it's that much. Are we going to be asking them for $200 and something thousand here pretty soon at the beginning of the build to offset the affordable housing that might be built down the road? Is that kind of where we're going with this?
Yeah, not exactly. I guess what I would say is that the way the current methodology is established in the code, it actually is a very modest in lieu fee. It is insufficient to actually pay for one affordable housing unit. So if you're paying in lieu fees for one affordable housing unit, it actually doesn't generate enough money to pay for one affordable housing unit. It's less than that because again, the methodology is it's the difference between the construction cost and how much a lower income household pays for the affordable housing unit. And that was just a formula that was established years ago. And it was intended, I think, to go easy on the development community, but it does not generate sufficient revenue to pay for an affordable housing unit. And again, that's subject, could be subject to change, but that's the current methodology that we have.
So if you have, what is your amount of money you're putting down for the construction cost? How much money are you putting aside?
It's basically how much money it costs to develop a generic affordable housing unit, which I think is generally speaking just a small standalone single-family house or a duplex unit, something like that. So
That's going to be $900,000. That's a standalone unit. It's going to be $900,000 to build. Like, I don't.
You're talking about the difference between what they would pay in rent and, like the portion of the amount that would be paid in rent, and then the subsidy on top of that. So I think that accounts for the difference between the, what Commissioner Heiser is describing as the cost of, the total cost of building, and then there's the amount of that would be paid for by the rents that are received, the reduced rents that are received, and the other portion that is paid for by the in lieu fees.
that's right.
I just want to make sure that we're being honest and very transparent about what we're talking about, because $40,000 seems very low. And we don't generally build a lot of 2,500 square foot houses. We either build 17 to 2,000 or it's over 3. So I just want to make sure that, one affordable housing unit is what, 600? But that would not be a single standalone family house. That's going to be an apartment dwelling, right?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that, and again, I think if there's interest in getting into sort of the details of how the fee is calculated, we should bring our staff from Archin who help us calculate that fee. But generally speaking, based on my understanding at least, we're not assuming that generic affordable housing unit in the city is 2,500 square feet, right? I'm guessing it's something like, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm guessing it's like 1,000 square foot housing unit or a 1,200 square foot housing unit or something like that, which would have a much lower construction cost than a standard, 2,500 or 3,000 square foot house. So
It would, but it's not going to be anywhere near $400,000. It's still going to be, you still have roofs, foundations, storm water detention tanks that are $300,000. So it's not low. It's not the numbers you were putting out. I think those numbers are inaccurate.
okay, we're happy to bring back numbers from other projects that we've imposed in lieu fees on at the city.
Yeah, and I also want to say, we're talking about modest, and it says very modest in lieu fees. No one else is doing in lieu fees for residential, standalone, single-family construction. And what I would say also is that the reason that the Master Builders Association is asking and changing a little bit, because I want to address what you said earlier, is because we don't want all the builders here to go bankrupt. So they need a little bit of time to sort out whether or not they can afford to do the projects and pay the in lieu fees, because we've been given no information really what that looks like. And the information we've been getting from all of our builder community, especially the ones that build the most of the housing that we have here in terms of residential, says this is completely unfeasible and they'll have to bring $700,000 to closing to pay for it. So there's just a big disconnect between whatever Arch was giving us and the staff was giving us and what we're hearing from the builder community. So I wanted to address maybe why the change that the master builders took for a minute here was just they need some time.
Yeah, that's fair. Again, I think the approach that is being recommended in option 2 is no in lieu fees for middle housing. So again, it's a different story, I think, for single family projects, but the option 2 is, yeah, literally no in lieu fees for middle housing projects. So.
Any further questions on this? All right, we'll go ahead and move on.
Okay, so let's move on. Oh, I lied to you. I did. We're not going on to parking. We're just going on to the additional code amendments that are in your packet. They do do some clarification and a little bit of consistency with our existing standards for multifamily. Essentially, what we do is we just adopt the current multifamily minimum density standards for projects in medium and high density zones. These were adopted in 2020 with the middle housing code amendments that essentially ensure that for properties in medium and high density zones that they build at 80% of the density of the minimum density. And this is based on the underlying density. We're not saying like this would apply to the new state density. We're just keeping at least your base density consistent. So the reason why we would do this is so that, developers could not just take a townhome product that they were already gonna build in a multifamily zone and just use our Chapter 113 as a bypass to get around the minimum density requirements. That's the reason why we put that in there. We did some clarification for how we actually calculate gross floor area for cottages. This is just based on existing practices, the kind of interactions that we've been having with developers, making sure that whatever we're calculating in terms of gross floor area on these size-limited units, that they're spelled out and consistent with our current practices. And then finally, right here, again, this other clarification component right here on the affordable housing requirements for multifamily zones. So we recrafted this a little bit so that if you have a multifamily project, considering that we're having a lot of discussion right now about applying inclusionary requirements in low density zones for the first time, right? We just want to make sure that, our practices in multifamily zones remain consistent. So we just refer out multifamily zones to existing inclusionary requirements. We may give them additional density, that's pretty much what you're getting with, application of 113, but you're still going to be subject to the same affordable housing requirements. And we'll be crafting a separate low density zone if that's the option that is recommended here, that we would draft an affordable housing requirement that would replace the existing one that we have in that chapter with something that's, based on the feedback in the zone. So that kind of keeps them completely separate. So for that standpoint, we could actually start looking at differences in the way we might, as you've kind of discussed here, about how do we calculate the fees. Maybe completely different methodology just for the low density zones if we chose at this point. So that's an option. And then finally, we did some updates to the accessory dwelling unit regulations. By the way, we were pretty close to what the state was already, so these were just minor tweaks. We did some clarification again on gross floor area because it's the only other building typology that is size restricted. So we just made sure that we were being clear on what exempting out a gross floor area when we're talking about accessory dwelling units. Moving on to some forthcoming amendments. This is going largely into the Senate Bill 6015, which really gets into just parking. What are you allowed to exempt? All that kind of fun stuff. But also, of course, the top bullet up here is like any kind of feedback that we received from you tonight about inclusionary. We will include that as well. Obviously, that's the forthcoming. The issues that, some things that are in 113 that we didn't address this time around deal with nonconformance of existing structures, like existing non-construct structures being able to be converted into accessory dwelling units. We have to address that in our nonconformance code. Street improvements, basically, we have to revise some of our requirements around required street improvements and what the state is now exempting accessory dwelling units from those street improvements. So we have to adjust those a little bit. And again, going into the parking requirements, we have to now start to create standards for tandem parking, allowing for, different surface materials, and reducing our stall sizes for residential uses, and then dealing with allowances of existing non-conforming parking areas, allowing those to continue. Those are very technical, like tweaks into our non-conformance code, just trying to meet the state standards and really focusing on residential. All right, now, here we get into parking. So last time we came to you, we had this slide that kind of showed you, like, here's our existing requirements and here's the state requirements. We've just kind of put in your packet in the draft code, the state requirements. It was pointed out that, hey, once you get outside of a major transit stop, our existing parking standards are a little more lenient than the state standards. And maybe we should look into that a little bit more. So that's what we did. We took some existing projects. We did some analysis on them. These are the different unit totals of these projects. Our current parking requirements on the next column, and then what the development community is actually parking at, and then the state maximum requirements outside of a half mile of a major transit stop. Short story is that developers are pretty much building like about two parking units per, 2 parking stalls per unit. It shouldn't be a surprise for most of the folks that actually do that product type, that they're closer to the state standards, but in certain circumstances where maybe we want to add flexibility, especially when there is frequent transit service available, they can go down. So the project down at the very bottom chose to use our minimum standards, where that would have been probably doubled under the state's requirements, probably making that project not feasible. Here's just, I don't know, we just wanted to do this. We went out around 6 o'clock in the morning, one morning this week, Tuesday, and went to these various projects, about 6 of these sites, saying if we did actually see some issues with over parking on the street, and we didn't. This is not a in-depth analysis. It's one day and didn't take care of evening, off-peak hours. This was at the beginning of beginning of commute hours at 6 o'clock in the morning. So, but we feel pretty confident that there's really very little on-street parking impact from this, based on pretty much that developers are actually parking for for the market and what the market's demanding. So there you go. So with that, we came up with this recommendation, which is just kind of a hybrid version, which is within the half mile. We obviously have to meet the state standards, but once you get outside of that half mile of a major transit stop, we just revert back to our standards around frequent transit, and then on Point 3 is like meet the state standards for accessory dwelling units, which we currently would require, a stall for the second accessory dwelling unit in most cases. That would be none at this point in time. So that's the staff recommendation for amending the code, at least the draft code. Now we can open up the discussion. These are the discussion items. These are the items that we covered here tonight, including the ADUs and density calculations, the range of housing types. Some questions for you about the affordable housing requirements, specifically what we've drafted and what we're offering up as the 3 options. Some feedback on those additional code amendments. Question about, maybe having another briefing prior to a public hearing. And then getting your take primarily on the 2 options that we provided for the parking requirements. I'll open it up for discussion.
Commissioner Medea?
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Appreciate it. Okay, so I'll go through each of the questions. On the first one, I think we're in a good place, focusing on the 6 of the 9 typologies. I think that's been pretty well vetted, and council seems to concur with clarity that the 5 and 6 plexes would only be in the multifamily zone. I think that's probably consistent with what the public could get behind. I also feel like there's agreement on the ADUs, limiting them to 2 and not including them in the density count. I'm down with that. Okay, so on the inclusionary zoning, affordable housing stuff, like I came in here really leaning toward option 2, but after speaking to some developers, and then I was at the MBAC's middle housing luncheon that Adam presented at, and then hearing some more conversation about it tonight, I'm really hesitant. To be fair, I did speak with planning staff about these options in the vein of like the pros and the cons. And that is based, and Scott, you said this tonight too, based on the idea that it could yield more affordable housing sooner rather than later, which is of course what we want. But seeing the pivot in MBAC's letter, despite some of the things we tried to do to address their concerns in the earlier one from February, I'm feeling like it would make more sense to allow time for more thorough analysis and input from the builder community, because as I've said before from this dais, we don't build housing, y'all do. And so I wouldn't want to put them in a situation where it is a disincentive and they don't build and we don't get what we're looking for. So I've kind of shifted a little bit on that. I would be interested in hearing more about whether
Real quick.
Yes.
Just, I just, maybe on this one, and I didn't do it really clearly in the slide deck, but if you can kind of mention like which option, because I'd like to kind of tally the options, right? So there's option 1 with state, 2 with
probably the
staff,
third
and
one
then
then.
3 is the defer.
I think that's where I'm leaning, yeah.
Sure,
Yeah.
okay. Just want to make sure.
Just to
that
be clear,
everyone's-
yes, because we'll have a
I want to
conversation
be
too
clear,
about
just want to make sure that I can,
what exactly we, pass on to council.
thank you.
But wait, there's more. So, but I would like to understand what that means. Like, is there an ability to say, yeah, we want to do this, but the implementation date is later? And I know Neil Black asked that same question at the council meeting, like, how do you have both? Okay, but going on with I'm going to answer all these questions and then let the rest of the commission speak. On the zoning amendments regarding multifamily density, et cetera, I mean, on paper, I'm not swimming in that space. This gentleman here was talking about some of the inconsistencies across each of those typologies, and that would be nice if that could be a little more clear. And one of the things we heard as well, Adam, at the MBAC's luncheon, is how difficult it is, and I never thought of it from this perspective, for the builders who build in a variety of municipalities, trying to have to understand how to apply those various codes to their projects throughout. So anything we can do, even within our own space, to drive consistency would probably be appreciated. I think I mentioned that. And then regarding an additional briefing, I'm not sure if I know if that feels totally necessary, but I'll defer to the rest of the group. And then option 1 on parking. See, I kept that last one brief for you. Okay, I'm done.
Commissioner Rosman?
I guess I'll go through all of them as well. I think pretty much I'm gonna go with what Commissioner Medea said on all of these. Let's take our time with the inclusionary. It's freaking hard to build anything right now, and, you know, as much as I want affordable housing, I want housing more than no housing at all. I don't think we need another briefing. I think we're ready to go to a public hearing, and very much in favor of option 1 for parking.
Commissioner Reisser?
I'm in agreement with deferring it because I just think it's going to add too much of a permitting fee onto an already burdensome for building, and especially in the building environment that we may be going into. I do have a little bit of a concern on the stacked flats. That's the only option that I really did not like. And I just think it looks too apartment-like for our neighborhoods. And also the constraints of height. It just doesn't seem like a really viable option. But I'm not an architect, so I don't know. I can see it would work really well if you were only putting 2 units on a, low-density zone. Getting 3 might be a little bit tight, but if you have a sloping lot, it might work. And I am also in agreement on option 1 for parking.
Can I make just a really quick comment on the stacked flats, on why I think they're actually an important, is specifically the accessibility piece for anyone with disabilities or seniors that can't do stairs. Stacked flats can be a really great option for people to have housing choice that doesn't include stairs within the unit, so.
Well, aren't staff like, so you'd have 1 unit?
It's like 1 per floor.
Yeah.
So stacked. And so it makes it a lot more accessible for folks to have housing units that are single floor.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. I was like, but access, you'd only have access to the first, but.
Well, but, then the first floor is completely accessible, and then people can go, upstairs or have one, electronic up, and then the entire floor is on one main
One
level.
of the reasons I was not, is our example was not a very good example in the picture.
Question of clarification from staff on stacked flats, and my reading is that you could build, that's kind of covered already with duplexes and triplexes. A duplex or triplex could potentially be built as a stacked flat, or are duplexes and triplexes explicitly horizontally attached?
They can be either. Technically, they can be either. This is a really confusing bill that kind of added housing typologies in there. I'm just, okay. We technically do that in our multifamily zones. We're just agnostic over it. We allow for attached or stacked. In phase 2, we'll probably just get rid of housing typologies and just go to just a generic stack flat, detached, attached, stacked option in all zones, and just be a little bit different in how we regulate them in our what is now low density zones versus our medium and high density zones. It just be different massing standards.
Okay, so
and allowances.
In the next phase, potentially regulating more based on the exterior form rather than how it's divided up internally.
Oh, we're lined up with simplifying the code. We want to get there. It just, that kind of stuff it takes time to do, and we just didn't have time to do that. We wanted to start right off the gate, just, taking out 113 altogether and just kind of blending it into our code and being really clean it up. We have developers that talk about this all the time. We talk about it all the time. It's something that we want to do, and that's what we want to come back to you in phase 2 and talk about.
Sounds good. Any other commissioners want to comment? Commissioner Jacobson?
Thank you. I think I'm in agreement with the rest of the commission on everything except the affordable housing requirement. A question, when we say defer, does that essentially mean we're giving up the ability to enact an affordable housing requirement using the extra capacity from this policy change? Or is the option for deferment saying, we'll do something and we're going to hold on to that? Or is it?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Commissioner Jacobson. That's a really good question. Yeah, we cannot, how do we say this, bank the additional development allowance that we're providing in phase one. So we would really have to forego adopting an affordable housing requirement until phase two. We can't bank what we're giving in phase one and then combine it with whatever we do in phase two and then adopt something. We could include a whereas statement, in the adopting ordinance for phase one, if you decline to adopt an inclusionary zoning requirement now, and just say, the council intends to adopt an inclusionary requirement in phase two, but that wouldn't allow us to bank the development allowances that we're giving in phase one.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't at the council meeting, but I watched the recording, and the sense that I got was that there's not an intention of, because there's not an option to bank it, there's not really desire to completely get rid of that option. And so I'm supportive of keeping with option 2. I'm concerned at the possibility of if the threshold is put at 2,000 square feet of a rise in, we'll say, 1,999 and a half square feet homes. And so I would be interested in some sort of option that is not like a all or nothing sort of thing. And so exempting the first X square feet, I think would be much better. In terms of implementation date, I would want, I don't know exactly how long it takes for developers from when they buy the property to when they get a completed building permit in, because that's when they vest. So I'm open to flexibility on that. But I think we need to learn from experience, and I don't think we're going to do that by punting it all the way to the end of phase 2. We know we're going to have the discussion again in phase 2, and I think it would be useful to see what happens with an implementation date that's not at the very end of phase 2. So sometime early next year, I don't know what the exact date is, could throw out like April 1st, 2026 or something like that. But I'm open to being persuaded in either direction on the exact date. I'm also open to a higher size exemption, that higher than even 2,000 square feet, because I think we don't want to be penalizing the sort of typical home that people live in. But I wouldn't say that tearing down a $1 million home and putting up a $4 million home is making Kirkland more affordable. So that's why I see this affordable housing requirement as a priority. I think if staff are going to bring an option for that, I would like to see how much funding it would have brought had it been applied to previous years. And we can throw on some multiplier of okay, this probably then reduces the amount of development because we're adding requirements on it. But I would like to see how much that would actually generate, because the city currently does not have any meaningful source of funding affordable housing. And I think this is a good option we should be considering. And I believe that's it. Thanks.
I'll speak if.
Vice Chair Heiser.
Yeah, I would just go back to that and say, the comprehensive plan that we suggested included policies that said specifically not to add to the cost of building housing. So we are going against our own comp plan that we've adopted by discussing this. We were very clear on, we don't want to add any more cost. We're going to have higher cost to building housing. So if you're also taxing that housing, it's just going to go up. So I don't want to be in non-compliance with our comp plan and our policies there. I don't think that makes any sense. I will say this because I haven't heard anyone else have the bravery to say it, but Arch, when I was reading Arch's analysis of their pro forma of what they thought a builder could possibly manage to give to affordable housing, they left out the 8% in closing costs. The closing costs handle excise tax, They cover realtors' fees. They cover title and escrow fees. That's 8% of the sales cost of a house. It's a huge number. They then inflated the builder profit in their model. So my question is, because they were involved in this from the beginning, did they do that on purpose because Arch is a pass-through company? So if they're helping with the creating the policies and what recommendations are going to come to us, wouldn't that benefit them? And the money gets passed through them. So when I see something that is so poorly done like this, it was done to either deceive the planning staff, the planning commission, and the city council to look like builders make a ton of money, we can just take some more from them, or they simply didn't even know anything about closing costs. So it's really hard for me to go, I'm going to listen to a model that was created by Arch because they don't have it's not an arm's length transaction with them, and we're not getting usable data. Also, Arch was very much involved in 85th, and that's been a debacle. So I'm leaning towards option 3, so that we have enough time to get, as we've heard from the Realtors Association just now, a more thorough and informed discussion regarding the economic feasibility of such requirements for developers of middle housing. Well, it's developers of any type of housing, because we all have to play by the same rules, right? We're all having to figure out financing. We're all having to figure out how to get permits through and not have all these carrying costs. But we need some more time, and we actually need to get a third-party consultant involved that doesn't profit from these policies? That would be one question I would have. And I'd really like to listen to the builders in this case, because we clearly didn't do that in 85th, and we're not seeing any movement there, and we're still seeing movement in Bellevue. So I have some issues, and I don't feel like the amount of transparency about the fee in lieu situation was very good here. I know you did give us some numbers. I'm still kind of confused about them. But I think if we're talking about fees in lieu, we need to be transparent about what is the planning staff looking for, what kind of numbers, because that's what kind of created this entire issue in the first place. Is we were looking at the affordability requirements on apartment buildings, and if you put that directly onto a single-family house, that's your profit. So no one's going to be building, no one's going to be financing the construction of building housing. So I don't want to be the first in the nation, like we always are, with everything and just adopting, because it really has not helped us piling on more regulation is not helping us getting housing built. And that just means the price goes up because people want to live here and there's no housing to be bought. So enough, I don't want to lecture anymore. I like option 3. When we talked to Allison, you thought that maybe we would vote tonight, but are we not voting on which option to recommend to council tonight, because it's not a public hearing?
So I think how we've been going down the line and getting the clear kind of guidance from each planning commissioner on which option you prefer is really helpful. And then if planning commission wants to take a vote as to which option you want us to develop into code, you can. We're kind of getting that as you're going, as long as you're clarifying, each saying individually what option you're in favor of.
Okay.
We can accurately reflect what the split might be.
Okay, and then Gina did bring up that we thought we might do a really good idea, do a recap at the end of the night so that you can tell us what you're planning on giving back to council. Okay, I think that's a great idea. Code amendments, just make it less complicated for all the architects and builders, please. So I don't think we need another briefing. And then parking requirements, option 1 is good.
I'm going to make some comments, and then I'll turn it over to Commissioner Medea for more. Building on Commissioner Heiser's questions about Arch, I was wondering, I realize that Arch is classified as a partnership between cities. My impression is that its staff is funded by the cities and not by the funds collected. Is that accurate? So it's not like Arch's operations are funded by portion of the fees collected, or I think that might be getting at some of Commissioner Heiser's concerns.
Yeah, I can try to respond to that. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally following the profit-making entity for Arch, or the profit-making claims about Arch. Yeah, there are city contributions that are made, I think out of our general fund, that go to Arch for their operations. So based on my knowledge of how that works, it's not a function of, how many permits we process or anything like that.
Or how much is collected that is designated for these affordable housing fees. They aren't funded by a portion of the fees collected.
Yeah, in lieu fees that are collected go into the trust fund, right? That is then, that the Arch Executive Board determines how to allocate to individual affordable housing projects.
But not allocated to their operation.
Correct, yeah. That's my understanding of how Arch
Okay.
works, yep.
Okay. That was my rough understanding, but that's not, I'm glad to have that clarification. On streamlining codes, this is something I was wondering about more broadly. How much does staff collaborate with nearby jurisdictions on seeing how our codes can be made more similar and make it easier for builders to move from one to another? Is that something that's...
Yeah, thank you for that question, because that's what a policy that we've kind of created in our comprehensive plan and adopted. As you recall, we've had a first briefing on this early or late last year. I think it was November, right? I believe we started talking about this conversation. And this is back before we adopted the comprehensive plan code. And so the initial intent was to try to start looking at what other jurisdictions are doing. I did reach out to Redmond and Bellevue, and there's a bunch of jurisdictions that have been sharing information on how they're approaching middle housing code. Specifically, I wanted to look at our neighboring jurisdictions like Redmond and Bellevue and seeing what they're doing, and having some conversations with them and their approaches towards that, and wanted to see if we can collaborate a little bit, at least in the general sense, that we can not make code that was too it's not like speaking, different languages at different, they do right now. But we've been working a lot on that, and this is probably one of the main things that we'll be taking away from the first phase of code amendments, and watching other jurisdictions, especially like Bellevue, as they're going to adopt their middle housing code. And so we'll be able to now look at what Bellevue's done and what Redmond's done, and then we can kind of make some similar adjustments that might maybe align those a little bit more. At least, it's been mentioned here, like verbiage and making things that look clearer and more
making the patterns more consistent, so
Yeah,
it's easier for them to follow, not necessarily setting the same thresholds or measurements, but
I feel for the developers that have to go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. I do, because they have to. I've had many conversations with them. I was like, why does Kirkland do this?
All right.
So that was definitely part of the conversation for sure.
Okay, sounds good. I think on the questions that are posed here on let's see, the affordable housing, I guess I'll start down that corner. I don't have a strong preference other than I want to make sure that we are not inhibiting the construction of housing. I have some serious reservations in general about the way that we place the economic burden of affordable housing on, especially today, on our most affordable housing, being the apartments that are being built. And so I'd like it to be not on housing at all, but instead, say, for example, on commercial property or that sort of thing. But that's outside the scope of this discussion. So the more that we can do to either delay or delay the discussion, or adopt something that maybe can have a deferred implementation date to give us the flexibility to further refine it in phase 2, if that's a possibility. Just want to make sure that we don't, it's a very complex topic to untangle and to understand, and I don't want to be pushing the clock too much on this to try to get this just right. I want to try to make it easy on staff too, and minimize the amount that you have to juggle between now and the deadline. So, and be able to focus on what really matters. Let's see, ADUs. Yes, ADUs. Let's see. Right now it's drafted as 2 limits per subject property, and that I think is maybe a bit vague. I look forward to like how this actually gets thought of in code, because I could see this being like, is it per lot or separately sold property, or is it what happens when we allow from like unit lot subdivisions? You know, does that become then, okay, you have a duplex, and then each of these duplex units is allowed 2. So there's a bit of untangling there potentially that we'll have to work through. Let's see. Would an ADU be able to be placed on, say, a front or a side yard with any of these, or is this still limiting the placement that's existing?
No, we can, that was removed from the code.
What's that,
The location.
the location limitation was removed from the
Yeah.
code?
Yeah, the limitations there. The only one that is still standing is, I believe, related to subdivisions, historic lot subdivisions, where that's the only like condition in which, you know, if under a preservation of a historic home, that there's that the accessory dwelling unit is not kind of, I guess, obstructing that from it. And then, yeah, that's the only case in which we have not really touched that yet.
All right. And then there was a question that I saw out in the public social media space, which I shared with Scott earlier, about current carve out for the second detached accessory dwelling unit in code that states that can only be 10% of the lot area over, say, the zoned lot size. I was trying to make sense of this comment, and you responded, but I'll let you respond to.
Yeah, so.
And do we intend to make
We
any
actually,
adjustments in there?
yeah, so so there's 2 sections that currently under code right now would limit the size of an accessory dwelling unit, especially the second unit.
Detached, or if both.
Either, you know, any accessory structure that is regulated, including accessory dwelling units, would be subject to this additional size limitation. The way the draft code is now is that we just eliminate accessory dwelling unit from that regulation. So it actually is just removed from that. So if that was the question, that has already been addressed.
Okay. 2 other quick topics. Density minimums, I'm a bit concerned about the way that density minimums might either inhibit the construction of larger apartments, say 3, perhaps even 4-bedroom units, because there you're creating you know, you'd be sacrificing density for having the larger apartment units potentially. So I'd want to make sure that we aren't putting that at risk. I'd also want to avoid inhibiting incremental development on larger lots. So maybe you start out by building 1 cottage on a large lot, but it's arranged in a way that allows for more cottages to be built on that lot at a future phase, which could, I think, make it easier to be financed, for example. If you could, like, we'll build 1 now, then we'll sell that, then we'll build another one, then we'll sell that. Much less capital intensive is kind of what I was thinking. So just want to be careful about that. In the square footage calculations, I was looking through, I was wondering, why would we limit uncovered deck space in that? And the other one was about areas under staircases being closed off. They wouldn't be counted if they're closed off and inaccessible, but I think especially in cottage houses, you want to be able to open up any sort of storage space that might be useful. And if it's closed off and inaccessible, that seems like a waste of space that could be, make it more functional to live in a more compact dwelling. And I don't see the purpose or the usefulness in providing an incentive to close off and make spaces inaccessible. So that's, I think that covers most of mine. One last point on typologies. I see the townhomes are included. I wonder how that would work, assuming that townhomes mean that they're attached side by side. But as long as we have side setbacks, it's not really practical unless we have some mechanism for allowing neighboring properties to agree that they can go up to the lot line. So, I mean, at this point, it'd be like, you can build townhomes as long as they all fit on one lot and adhere to the existing envelope limitations, which I'm guessing means you'd really only see them in duplex or quadplex form.
Yeah, so some of that would be addressed in the unit lot subdivision code that's being drafted right now. So there's a requirement under state law that we, adopt a unit lot subdivision. That's being picked up by Janice Swenson. She's been kind of working on that unit lot subdivision code. So that would allow for, these units to essentially be on their own individual lots. They could be potentially in there. So right now, the way the development standards for middle housing code is that it's considered like a parent lot. And so really what your setbacks are around the perimeter. So then under, a unit lot subdivision, then you can take the individual unit lots and make them their own little components and stuff, so.
And in that scenario, could you potentially aggregate multiple lots into a larger parent lot and then subdivide them under this, or would that be?
Yeah, they're just treated as one parent lot. So these are just one parent. You'd have to do that as a lot consolidation first, and then you would do it like make that the parent lot, and then
Sounds like some hoops to jump through. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, it could happen, but the idea is that the the way that we're dealing with right now, most of those developments can develop with the exterior setbacks being respected, and then they condominiumize after that. And unit lot subdivision just allows you to just take that same concept but make them actually fee simple product.
All right, great, thank you. I think Commissioner Matei had a comment or question.
I had a follow-up question as we are talking about the affordability requirements and the concept of delaying, and I want to be clear what we're giving up. But we're not giving up density options, right? We're giving up incentives that later could be used to attract development.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Medea. I think, I guess the way I would describe it is that, under state law, right, you have to give development allowances to require affordable housing. And so we're giving something right now, right? It might be relatively modest in scale, but, we're expanding development allowances for housing, middle housing right now. And again, by adopting affordable housing requirements now, we would be basically giving away those development allowances and not getting affordable housing in return, if that makes sense. And then, again, based on the direction that we've gotten from the vast majority of commissioners, when we go into phase 2, that's when we would consider affordable housing requirements. And again, the outcome of that would be based on additional development allowances that are being granted as part of phase 2.
This notion of what we can't bank now, I guess I'm still not clear on. I'm still in favor of delaying, although with respect to not continuing to kick it too far down the road. But I want to just make sure I understand and that it's clear when we recommend to council and to the public what it is that what we're giving up by delaying. And I'm still not sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah, so what you're giving away, I guess, as part of phase 1 is allowing, development up to 6 units per lot, right? Any reductions in parking, right? The additional housing typologies that we're adding, right? So those are all the development allowances I think that we're giving as part of phase 1. And in exchange for those, we're not asking for affordable housing. Does that make sense? Am I?
If we use like a bank metaphor, right, like and we say like use like a credit structure, so we are giving a certain amount of credits right now, and if any new requirements, like new inclusionary requirements, have to achieve some type of proportionality between the give and the get, the credits that we're giving in phase 1, if we don't adopt anything new, we don't get to add the credits now to the credits that we might be giving with the phase 2 adjustments. So if the total of phase 1 and phase 2 would be like this many credits, if we only do inclusionary zoning in phase 2, it might only be this many credits, and we can do that, and that's the direction we're hearing. But that's kind of the concept, is some trying to achieve some type of proportionality with what we're asking for in return.
Okay, and then last comment, and so as we think about that vis-a-vis the fact, as was stated again tonight, right, we already are the 3rd densest city in the state. Like, I'm still hopeful we'll continue to make good progress in housing and affordability, even if we do cool our jets a little bit now and defer it in option 3. Is that kind of a fair guess?
Yeah, I think that's a fair guess. Again, that's a totally appropriate approach. Again, it depends. The caveat is that it depends what happens in phase 2, right? So if ultimately, council, based on Planning Commission guidance, adopts a phase 2 that doesn't give a lot away, that might constrain our ability to require affordable housing. And I have to say, there's not a very scientific formula that you can build for something like this. So it's slightly subjective, but we try to be as rigorous about it as possible. But I just want to be really clear that what you're going to be asking, what you would ask for as part of phase 2 is going to be based on how many new development allowances do you grant as part of phase 2.
And mind if I'll ask one clarifying question? We can potentially, let's say, adopt option 2, but with the deferred implementation date of like a year or so down the line as kind of a way of banking it, but being able to refine it.
Yeah, I wouldn't call that banking.
I know, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, you could adopt option 2 now and have it a delayed effective date of whatever you feel like is appropriate.
Yeah, okay. Commissioner Reiser?
As and if we get to phase 2, I would still rather see incentives to get builders to build affordable units, because we're using the penalizing. I would be game for reducing parking if they did affordable units. I would be for giving them, deferred permitting costs or, breaks for those units that are affordable. It just seems like we have so many other ways to work with the builders, and I'm sure builders could come up with even better incentives than I can to encourage, because we keep acting like the only way we can get this affordable housing in these units is to either have a very good-natured builder that's going to do it without being asked, or penalize them for making additional housing when we need the additional housing. So I would rather see in our next go-round at least an option to have, okay, if you build an affordable housing unit that will continue to be an affordable housing unit for a long period of time, the city can give you some incentives.
And we had examples of that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
What's that?
I didn't realize you were still.
No, go ahead. I would say, hey, I'm don't really like reducing parking minimums, but I would say if somebody's building an affordable housing unit near a transit line, okay, maybe they don't have to have a parking, I would go to 0. for that. That would, I'm sure, give, you know, a break to these developers and builders. I would say, hey, is there a way we can reduce, not the permitting on the full priced units, but the affordable? Can we give them a permit break?
Yeah, and so we do have examples of that in our code already. So I think in response to your interest, we do have some areas where we have examples or precedent. And so in the station area, the Planning Commission actually did recommend and council adopted a lower parking requirement for affordable units than market rate units. So for affordable units in the station area, they have a parking requirement of 0 compared to the parking requirement for market rate units. So that's a way you incentivized it.
Yeah.
And then we do also have some zoning districts where you can get bonus density if you provide on-site affordable units. So if you provide 1 affordable unit on-site, you can get 2 bonus units, and that would be in addition to whatever the maximum density is for that zone. There's also a couple zones where we provide a little bit of height bonus for affordable units. And so we have some precedent and could give you some examples if you wanted to build on that in phase 2. So I really appreciate the
very
comment.
much so would like to, and I would say probably the commission as a whole, I'm not speaking for everybody, but I think they would like to see it at least.
All right, would anyone else? Does anyone else have any comments, or does staff have any further questions, need for clarification? Bounce your summary.
Do we want to, sorry, do you want to, just for our ability to kind of move forward with the affordable housing requirement, do you want to do a motion for any particular option or direction in option for recommendation to city council?
I think it was pretty clear that it was option 3, right? Do we need a motion for all of this, or just that one particular?
I can read back what I have, but if any of the planning commissioners are feeling like you want it more formal, you can certainly make a motion. So what I have noted is 1 commissioner that stated a preference for option 2, 4 commissioners that have stated a preference for option 3. Chair Rutherford, I didn't hear a specific option stated, and then of course Commissioner Robbins, is absent tonight. So
I think I was saying 2, but with a deferred implementation.
I guess I'll make a motion then for, to recommend option 3 for the inclusionary zoning requirements.
I second the motion.
Can I make a quick
Yeah,
comment?
go ahead and make a.
Sure. Just on the piece about, you know, if we give something now, then we can't bank it for later. We're not really giving much of anything right now. You know, we did our middle housing work back in 2019, you know, implemented in 2020, and we're not really, I don't know how you could argue for any kind of affordable housing requirement based on the like sliver of what this gives, because, you know, if we were in another city that didn't already have middle housing codes, I would say that would be different, but, you know, I feel like this is just like fractionally different. So I am very good with just option 3, and then if we want to talk much bigger incentives and gives, then that's, I think, the appropriate time to talk inclusionary zoning.
Commissioner Medea?
Can we just make sure that as you relay to council what we talked about and how we wound up on option 3, that we definitely still have a preference to engage in that work sooner rather than later, so we're not continuing to really push it out indefinitely? Thank you.
we certainly can, and just as I think Scott has a schedule slide next, but just specific to this, because we really want to make sure that we're conveying Planning Commission's direction to council in a way that everyone's comfortable with and that we're being accurate. So we are not going back to council before we come back to you at this point for the public hearing. So you'll have a chance to hold the public hearing, receive testimony, reach a formal recommendation, and it's sounding to me like this is falling into the category of the type of projects you would like to send planning commissioners with us to council so that you have an opportunity to speak directly to them. So I think this seems like a good one for you to send some representation to council directly with staff.
Sounds good. Vice Chair Heiser?
I very much agree with Commissioner Rosman's statements. Should we go to a vote, or does anyone else?
Yeah, we can call the vote unless I see any other one wanting to discuss. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
That's 5 in favor, 1 opposed.
Okay, so I think we wanted to kind of summarize what we've heard, right? So it seems for the densities and ADUs, we're generally agreeing that the options that were, what we've staff drafted so far, it seems like the right approach, including also the range of housing types in low density versus medium and high density zones. Large agreement on that. Some feedback on some of the code amendments as it relates to, additional code amendments and some of the code amendments that we've also brought to you today that were part of the additional code amendment code amendments that weren't previously presented to you, specifically with Chair Rutherford's comments on those topics, and we'll be working on responses to that. I think we got a pretty good vote on not receiving a briefing until the public hearing. Is that correct? I think we got a vote on that, but I think we heard largely that no briefing is needed and go to the public hearing. And then option 1 for the hybrid city and state parking requirements that we presented tonight. Is that covering it?
Sounds good. Looks like we have consensus on that.
You like the slide? I like this slide. I don't have another slide, by the way. I don't have a schedule slide. The next time we had tentatively, in your packet, we had tentatively scheduled a public hearing on the 8th. This will give you a lot of time to we get a little bit of wiggle room there. So if you needed to continue, May 8th is the next time. I'm not going to go to you on the 8th. You're not even around on the 8th. So May 8th, and that gives you an option to kind of even continue if you needed to the following meeting in May. Hopefully not. And then we'll have plenty of time for council to consider your recommendation in either late May or early June, well ahead of the time when we need to actually get adopted before the state.
All right. Sounds good. I think that brings us to the end of that item on our agenda, right? All right. Next item listed is public hearings, of which there are none, followed by reading and or approval of minutes. We have minutes for February 13th.
A motion to approve the minutes from February 13th.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And on to the next item. Administrative reports and Planning Commission discussion. Any reports from staff?
Yes, just a couple. So for a quick calendar update, we have no items on your April 10th meeting. We will be canceling that April 10th meeting. We'll see you back here on April 24th. That will be a little bit of a busier meeting. We have a second briefing on the Juanita zoning request. So that's the Michaels and the Goodwill sites, as we've been calling them. Just a quick update. We did go to the Finn Hill Neighborhood Association last night and had a really good conversation. It was a packed house about those specific code amendments. So we'll be bringing a second briefing back to you on that with draft code with a range of options for you as you directed us at your first briefing on those code amendments. We'll also be bringing you your first briefing on our critical area ordinance updates. So that's another state requirement. We're required to update our critical area ordinance this year. That covers streams, wetlands, geologically hazardous areas, and habitat areas. So first briefing on that is coming to you on April 24th. And then lastly, a really brief public hearing to discuss the zoning text amendment that enables development agreements throughout the city. So not an actual development agreement, just zoning text that says people can propose a development agreement. So that public hearing will be on April 24th. And then aside from the public calendar, just wanted to give you all an update on what's happening with the planning work program. So this is on council's calendar to discuss on April 1st. Chair Rutherford and Vice Chair Heiser will be coming with staff to that meeting. Council is not intending to adopt the planning work program at the April 1st meeting, but they are receiving a briefing. And so we have a draft planning work program based on your last discussion on it. Chair Rutherford and Vice Chair Heiser have reviewed that draft work program. The draft work program and the staff memo for it will be published in the council packet that goes live tomorrow. So that would be a good chance for everyone to look at it. If you have any questions about it, we're happy to answer. And that's it from me.
Sounds good. Any topics that any commissioners would like to discuss? Seeing none, waiting for the uncomfortable silence, and seeing no one speaking up, we reach the next item on our agenda, which is comments from the audience. Would anyone like to speak either in person or in the online audience? Go ahead and come forward, and Liz, and do you have any hands online? If you want to speak, raise your hand, hit the raise hand button. Go ahead and come forward.
Hi, Liz Hunt. I wanted to just speak briefly about the parking. Thank you for the data that you folks gathered on parking that is being provided in units that are being built and what you're seeing on the streets. Data is always good. I would like to add that you didn't come to my neighborhood. I noticed we weren't on your list of projects that you included, and I don't know what the time frame was for them, so maybe that was why. But I have noticed that we have a lot of building going on and a lot of middle housing being built. Well, they're ADUs and DADUs, so not so much middle housing. But what we are seeing is, or what I'm seeing is that the somewhat bigger developments, for instance, that take down one house on a good-sized lot and they're providing 4 units, so 2 homes and then 2 detached ADUs, so if you've got 4 separate living units. Those tend to have more off-street parking provided. It's a bigger lot, there are bigger units being built. However, the popular plan that we're seeing with 3 units replacing 1 unit, where you have a main house, an attached ADU with a little breezeway piece, and a DADU, that 1 to 3 plan, we are seeing much less parking going in on the 2nd and 3rd unit. They tend to be smaller units, and they have maybe an off-street parking space snuggled up to the alley, but even when I went on a tour of one of those, the realtor said, "Oh, well, you don't need to park over there. You can park on the street right here in front of your unit because that's what you're going to want to do," and that's what they're doing. So there's a noticeable increase in on-street parking around those 1 to 3 kinds of developments. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Would anyone else like to speak? Go ahead and come up, John.
John Kapler, I appreciate the robust discussion. Thank you all for doing that. One comment that didn't come up at all regarding parking and access to properties is building site coverage. In Kirkland, we have a 50% number for FAR and a 50% number for coverage. Oftentimes that requires homes to get skinnier and taller, so we have room on the site for patios and sidewalks and outdoor areas, that sort of thing, which we all love and enjoy because we like the outdoors here in the Pacific Northwest. When we cram other units on the property and try and give people parking on their property so they're not parked on the street, we want them to get on-site and parking. That takes pervious area to do. The housing units that was just spoken of, oftentimes you need impervious area to get to the back of the property to allow access to the back of the property with a vehicle. In Kirkland, you can only have one curb cut. What we're talking about tonight is planning. We don't really cross-pollinate with a lot of the public works issues, and oftentimes in code, when we study as architect sites, there's a crash between those two. I know staff is working really hard to resolve those now, but right now in the cottage code, we're allowed 2 curb cuts, but not on anything else. So if we call something an ADU and we don't call it a cottage just because it works better in the code, we can't have a second curb cut to get to that other unit. But when we all drive by it, it looks exactly the same. It's used exactly the same. Just during the planning process, we call it something different, so we can't do that. And I think these are some crashes that would be nice to kind of fix. If we talked about impervious area possibly as a different number, and curb cuts as well. Have multiple curb cuts. Thank you.
Thank you, John. All right. Seeing no further comments, I just want to confirm there's no one online who's raised their hand in the meantime. That brings us to the end of our agenda, and this meeting is adjourned.